Well, in a kind of a classic Washington Friday evening news dump, the Biden administration's Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report on the potential origin of the COVID-19 pandemic, as required by the COVID-19 Origin Act of 2023, which was signed by the president back in March. Now, rather than releasing the actual intelligence, which the law called for, the office merely released their opinion about the intelligence, according to Congressman Mike Turner, the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Now, is this the sort of transparency that this administration promised? Join me now to discuss this is Congressman Greg Murphy, who is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and the House Administration Committee. He represents the 3rd Congressional District of North Carolina. Dr. Murphy, welcome back to the program. Always great to see you.
Nice to see you, Tony. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing good, thank you. So remind us about exactly what the COVID Act of 2023, the Origin Act, did.
It basically, Tony said, we needed to look into the origins. We need transparency. We need to delve into the reason that over 1 million Americans died and see what the true origins of this were. You know, during the Pelosi era, there was nothing done. Nobody did anything about where did this come from, asking questions that pretty much Fauci and his colleagues got a free ride from. They didn't question what they were that they were saying about the origins of COVID. So it was a bipartisan, bicameral bill signed by the president. He got forced to sign it, really, to look into why were we the way we were. Why did we just basically destroy our country in so many ways, the economies, the educational systems, and who is culpable? And without going on further, Tony, the eyes have been squarely on Fauci, on the Wuhan Institute from day one, despite all their other stories to make you look elsewhere. In my mind, and I've said this 1,000 times, in my mind, it came from that lab via a leak. And with all the scientific communities, and as you pointed out, a Friday night news dump, pretty much I think that's consensus opinion. Real question is, what are we going to do about it?
Well, in the 10-page report, as Mike Turner pointed out, it's more of a summary of what they think the intelligence is as opposed to what the intelligence actually was, to give you, as members of Congress, the opportunity to look through that, because there were differing opinions on the origins and how it did get leaked.
Yeah. Well, you know, Tony, one thing that really disappeared during COVID is the fact that, you know, physicians and scientists can have differing opinions, hence the old term second opinion. But since Fauci took it over on about day 5, when immediately everybody was pointing to the Wuhan lab, and it was like immediate suddenly, whoa, we can't do this because it's going to point back at us. And Echo Alliance and all the funding that the NIH has given, it was basically one person and one opinion telling you what, quote, science was in that famous interview, that he was science. And so,
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure there was differing opinions with this, but whenever they would come out with a report, it would be a consensus. It doesn't mean everybody agrees, but it was mean the general consensus of the review board that this is what the facts were, this is what happened. And I think that's what we're finding out with so many agencies now, not only, you know, in our government, but other watchdog agencies.
So based on that, well, there's a couple of things here. Number one, remember when those who raised this issue that it came from the lab, that was the most probable explanation, that they were censored by social media. So let's not forget that these were the conspiracy theorists who were putting this forward. Now we know that is in fact fact.
Yep.
But when you look at and again, you're getting a summary, you're not getting the actual intelligence. What do we know about the genetic makeup of this virus? Was it engineered? Was this a part of the gain of function that we had been looking at or been hearing about that Fauci was funding?
In my opinion, Tony, it was absolutely gain of function. And gain of function, if we just can remove ourselves from the pandemic, the purpose of gain of function research was to try to predict things that could possibly happen in nature so that we would stay ahead of those things. So in theory, gain of function is good research. The problem is the Wuhan lab was an absolute disastrous SL4 lab, one of these ones that are supposed to be so so tight and so leak proof. And the Chinese made shoddy construction and everything else. And so what we know now is that there were certain, and the gal from the Chinese gal who came out of that lab proved it in, I can't remember if it was JAMA or in the New England Journal or which article, proved the genetic code on how it was made and how it did come from that lab. And so, of course, she was silenced, as were several other scientists that came from, Hopkins and some of the other institutions that really brought up, hey, look, this absolutely looks like gain of function research. So we saw the silencing of differing opinions, as has been the case during this entire administration. Look, we saw it with Biden and the IRS and everything else last week. So the fact that we're actually now coming out with true science and breaking through is really a thing of which that should receive thunderous applause.
So what were they hiding? Was this all to save face? Was this why? What was this all about? What was driving this at the very foundation?
I think two things, Tony. Two things is that the NIH funded this lab, number one. They went through Eco Alliance and they paid to fund this lab. The second, I think, and that's, I don't say that's nefarious. I say that's what they're supposed to be doing, supposedly. The Wuhan lab is separate from the Chinese Communist Party, but anything in China is always subservient to the Chinese Communist Party. The second may be a little bit more theoretical and pure. It was in the pursuit of science. It was actually intended to do a good thing to save us if, God forbid, there were certain variants and mutants that came up out of this very, very infectious virus, to try to predict it ahead of time. The problem was Fauci's not a person who tolerates being questioned very well. He doesn't like his authority questioned very well. He's been in governmental medicine for greater than 40 years, and he's risen to the pinnacle of what they term one of the great scientific institutions. So he didn't want there to be any crack in what his decision-making processes were. But in fact, there should have been cracks. There should have been questions allowed. And he honestly has destroyed so much trust in medicine from the American public. I mean, I'm a physician. I still practice. I hear these things, well, we don't trust the government anymore. And I lay that precisely at his feet.